We're going to start off with a pop quiz. But this is probably the easiest question that you've ever been asked in a pop quiz, so no pressure. If I were to see you one morning, let's just say you were sitting in a room, and I were to greet you with, "Good morning," your response to me would probably be what? Mine too. Now, everyone has their reasons for why certain memories that they hold are so incredibly vivid, no matter how long ago these memories are. And so I'm going to talk to you about my first day of kindergarten. I remember being sent off to school. I had a clutch, like a little purse, a black and white striped purse, and it had a piece of fruit inside. Looking back, I suppose that my family thought that I was going to do what many students in countries around the world do, which is go to school, come home for lunch, and then go back to school. So I went off. I went off to school with my little purse and an apple. And that's what I had that day. There was no coming back home for lunch to return back to school. Luckily, the black and white striped clutch purse was not long-lived. It was very short-lived because we were able to set up my lunch, and that was that for the clutch. So on my first day of kindergarten, and I say my first day because I actually entered after school had already started. My family came into this country in the late 80s as refugees, and I got off the school bus and was met with a school staff member, later piecing it together. She was my ESL, or I should say ELL, sorry, I'm showing my age too, ESL instructor who appeared to be white, and she said, "Good morning." And I stayed silent. She repeated herself and said, "Good morning." And in my mind, I'm thinking, are we gonna head over to the big building? Or, what are we doing? What is this? And so I don't know how many times she said it, but finally I told her, "No." No good morning, and proceeded to follow the other kids to the building. My younger sister laughs her heart out to this day. My logic, though, back then was, side note, this is still my logic now, if I don't know what it is that you're asking of me, or I feel uncomfortable, not safe, scared, you're getting a no. And so that's what that teacher got. She got a no good morning. Language is, and this is not, front page news, but language and communication is incredibly vital. Those first few years, school is really isolating. I think that most people understand that having to learn a whole new language is incredibly difficult. But I think what's left out of that conversation is what that day-to-day school life looks like for an ELL student. The bonding that you see between folks because they're able to communicate with one another. This is kind of, the vulnerability it takes to share, right? I remember feeling jealous, actually, of students who were able to have this special relationship with their teachers, well, our teachers, right, that I did not have. Them bringing in their new toy and telling the teacher about it. I see them, pointing, and they've got this toy in their hand, or they're talking about whatever it is that they did, and there was none of that in those, first, I'd say, year or so. So that bonding and feeling on the outsides of it was pretty tough. And then there were days where I'm like, you know what, I've got it down. I've memorized what the school schedule is going to be. I'm going to know exactly when to sit, when to stand. I'm going to know what, I'm going to be ready for lunch. Like I'm going to know when it's time to go out for lunch, come back in from recess. I've got this memorized and feeling so confident. And then there being a change that, of course, is communicated in English and being the only one at the door or piecing things together and figuring out, kind of by myself here on the merry-go-round, I guess they're going off to do something, let's go see. And that confidence just kind of being swept away. I was disciplined for miscommunications. That was tough. I remember there was this one day when we all went to the library and we were all looking at books. And I remember grabbing 2 books that I was interested in flipping through because I couldn't read them. And I remember a student came up, said a whole bunch of stuff that was just like, girl, what? And then took one of my books and went off. Well, you're not going to take my book without me just addressing that. So I went over to her, snatched my book back, and went back to my corner. And I remember later my parents telling me the school told us that the student told them that she'd asked if she could switch books with you. And she, to her credit, did put a book down, took mine, and took her seat. I was sent to the counseling office. Parents were called. And even after that day, there was just something in the air that was different between that teacher and me. I mean, it was already tough, but it just reached new heights. I'm grateful, though. I'm very grateful for parents who believed me, parents who pieced together the pieces of a story and took into account the daughter that they knew. So even if truth was not realized at school, there was a sense of justice at home. There actually, I talk about being grateful. There are a couple of reasons why I kind of consider myself lucky even through the mess. I was fortunate enough to come with my small yet immediate family. Not a lot of refugees get to do that. Sometimes families come broken up. Sometimes, parent will go, kids will stay with a relative, and are brought together years, sometimes even decades later. That wasn't my experience, and I'm really fortunate for that. Also, coming into this country at a really young age, I absorbed the language pretty quickly. I mean, what do you have to do at 5, 6? So picking up the language was really simple. And I don't know what my experience would be if I came, say, teen years. That'd be incredibly difficult, I'd imagine. And I've seen it be more of a difficult integration into schools when folks come at an older age. So I picked up the language pretty quickly, and then it was IEP time. Another beast of its own. We'll get to it. It makes sense to first tackle the language and then to move on to accommodations and such. And what I can say about being a student who had an IEP for a disability that sometimes I had to remind and reiterate and validate, because for some it was incredibly evident, and for others it just took reminder after reminder after reminder and questioning of why I would ask for accommodations. Even through all that, though, what I can say is I have not had an experience where an accommodation that I needed in school was snatched from me. And sadly, not everyone can say that. There are so many students who fall through the cracks So back to the beginnings of now tackling the need for an IEP. In the beginning, there was a lot to cover. I was introduced to a lot of assistive technology. There was time with mobility instructors, so it was pretty packed. As I moved through my K through 12 education, though, folks just didn't know what to do. We've covered everything. Now what? And so there was a lot of just fumbling that happened. And again, although nothing was ever taken away, I did experience sort of this, we don't really know why you're here or what to do with you. And as a student, you're trying to figure yourself out. You're trying to figure out, how you express yourself. So I didn't have a response to that. In my mind, all I knew is I knew what helped me, I knew what didn't, and to think about not being tied to that support was kind of scary. And so not knowing whether the support would be there or not was always a fear because of what certain folks would comment. Luckily for me, though, like I said, nothing that was implemented was ever snatched. I was student and translator at all of my IEP meetings. Imagine being 10, 11, and IEP instructor saying, well, you don't really necessarily have to be present for this one, but it'd be great if you could come and help out your folks. I remember there was an interpreter that was provided one time, and the thing about language, it's complex, right? Some folks can maybe hear a language more but have difficulty speaking it, and that was my mom. And so when she noticed that the interpreter wasn't necessarily sharing everything that my mother was saying, the school said, oh, we'll take care of that, that's fine. And I guess them taking care of it was hiring, not paying me, to be translator at all IEP meetings. It was a strange thing to be student and translator at these meetings. But in a way, knowing that what my mother needed to say and what was being shared, there was a disconnect there. In a way, I kind of felt, I guess you could say, obligated, and that whole loyalty thing kicks in, and you don't want to say, I'm just a kid. Moving through, like I said, my K through 12 education around middle school, we just really didn't know what to do with that period in the day where I was removed from gen ed. Sometimes it became study hall, which actually kind of caused me to fall back on my studies because I just figured, well, we've got regular study hall in gen ed, and I've got study hall in a self-contained classroom, so why do homework? We just had no idea what that period was going to be used for after the introduction of all the assistive technology, after the mobility instruction. And so one day I called myself advocating for myself, right, which is incredibly difficult for someone who has yet to find her voice. Things have changed. And I proposed that I would take an elective because I wasn't taking any electives at the time. And I remember the mobility instructor being so incredibly against it. And not coincidentally, about a week later, she thought that it would be a great idea to invite my mom to see the work that we've been doing. And so, of course, my mom accepted her invitation and came. And this woman proposed that I continue with the mobility instruction, because I kind of shared it with my mom and I kind of didn't. Like, I don't know if I want to take more classes. And we're doing the same thing over and over, like I'm not learning anything. And she said, she talked about the importance of it, what we've been working on, and she asks my mother in front of me, what do you think if your daughter continues? My mom, of course, right? She wants the best. That'd be great. And As we were exiting, this woman leans into me. I will never forget how she says this. And she says, "Ha ha, I'll probably be here next year too." I could not wait to get home so I can tell my mother the story. We got as far as to the bus stop. I couldn't even hold it in. And I said, "This is what she said." My mother flipped out. She said, "What? Why would she say it in that way?" And that's what I mean by being so grateful for having parents who listened. I continued to have that mobility instructor, though. And again, there was a sense of justice at home. This story isn't about demons and saints. That's not what it is for me. But it is important to kind of think about how folks use their power and what intentions people have. And looking back on it, I'm wondering, was that a contract for her? What was the purpose? It's hard to look at ourselves, our colleagues, but if it means that voices are being squashed, then we need to do that. I had a similar experience with an instructor who was later removed, who took it upon herself to teach me world history. I'd never been taught a subject like that outside of gen ed, and I never did after her. It's important to question ourselves and our colleagues, no matter how difficult. If it's not student-centered, then it doesn't matter. It just doesn't. I think a lot about what justice could have looked like for me in school. Me, someone who looked like me. Someone with similar experiences as myself. I challenge, I don't know if we have any superintendents or anything, or anyone in the house, but if not superintendent, someone who often travels to schools, who attends meetings, that sort of things at different schools. I challenge you to play a numbers game. So it's fun, it's a game. Tied to white supremacy. I invite you to, when you are in a room at a school, consider the students that you see in the hallway, what they look like, how they move, how they talk. And then once you step inside your meeting, look around the table. Who's moving, who's talking, who's expressing the same way that you saw out in the hallway or out on the playground as those kids? I've walked through schools as a social worker where I've seen so many immigrant families, immigrant students, students with disabilities. I'm at these meetings, and a lot of the times it's me and one other person of color, being the only person with a disability. We have a lot of genuine folks in our schools, and let's keep it real, not everyone is, means well. There's a lot of self-interest as well, but for the most part, that hasn't been my experience, with the exception of 2 folks throughout my entire K through 12 school. Most people are well-meaning and genuine. The thing is, that's just not good enough. We need adequate representation among staff. We need to squash this message that, no, you receive services, you are not the providers of. So I challenge you to play my white supremacy numbers game. Thank you.